We've been taught that to be powerful, we must be loud, to make noise, to push harder, to dominate the room. But the deepest power makes no sound. It doesn't ask to be heard. It doesn't compete to be seen. It simply arrives, and everything around it responds. There is a kind of presence that cannot be faked, a resonance that does not speak, but still moves the world. You don't need to shout to be felt. You don't need to convince to be believed, because the energy you carry, when it's aligned, honest, whole, is louder than your voice could ever be. This is not about manipulation. It's about memory. The memory of a power you once embodied, before you were told you had to perform to matter. Tonight, we return to that power, the one that moves without needing to move anything, the one that radiates without asking for attention, the one that was always yours, beneath the noise.
Chapter 1. You were always more felt than heard. Before you learned to speak, you were already speaking, not in words, in energy, in presence. The room shifted when you entered, not because you demanded it, but because something in you reminded others of what they forgot. You were always more felt than heard, and you still are. But the world told you to prove, to persuade, to perform. So you raised your voice and lowered your frequency. You got louder and smaller. But presence doesn't rise with volume. It deepens with truth. It expands with stillness. The people who carry the most power often speak the softest because they don't speak to be heard. They speak from already knowing they're felt. You don't have to prove your gravity. You only have to stop resisting your stillness. That's where your true voice lives, beneath the one you were taught to use. Chapter 2. The weight of silent alignment. The loudest person in the room is not always the one most listened to, because presence has weight, not because of tone, but because of truth. When your words match your energy, when your stillness aligns with your center, you carry a quiet gravity. People don't know why they lean in, why they pause, why they feel safe. It's not charisma, it's coherence. It's not performance, it's purity. Alignment is when your being says the same thing as your mouth, your movement, your gaze, and the world listens. Not because you are loud, but because you are clear. Clarity has weight. It bends the air around it. It doesn't push, it simply stands and is felt. You don't need to broadcast. You need to become so aligned, so authentic, so grounded that the world cannot help but respond. Chapter 3. How energy speaks before you do, before you speak. Your energy already has. Before you explain, justify, or ask, your field has already told the truth. You are not what you say, you are what you carry. And what you carry, the world reads instantly. Not through logic, but through resonance. Have you ever walked into a room and felt something shift? Not because of what was said, but because of who had entered? That is energy before language. It's the ancient conversation, the one underneath all words. And the reason you often feel misunderstood is not because they didn't hear you, but because they felt something you didn't know you were carrying. This is the invitation to become aware of what your being speaks before your mouth opens. Because the moment you align the two, your presence becomes undeniable. Chapter 4. You don't project power, you remember it. Power is not something you create. It's something you remember. Something that was never lost, just buried. You were born with presence, born with clarity, with gravity, with truth. But then came noise. Then came the pressure to impress, to outperform, to prove. So you performed, and your power dimmed beneath performance. But real power doesn't need to be performed. It doesn't need permission. It doesn't even need recognition. It only needs remembrance. Because you don't project power, you relax into it. You don't declare it. You allow it. And when you do, when you finally stop building a mask and start listening to the energy beneath, the world doesn't just see you, it adjusts to you. Because the most radiant beings are not louder, they're just more true. Chapter 5, The Radiance That Doesn't Push. Radiance is not about intensity, it's about consistency. A light that doesn't flare up, but shines steadily. When your presence is gentle, yet unwavering, you become a beacon. Not because you demand attention, but because you maintain clarity. True radiance doesn't push, it invites. It doesn't stress, it doesn't strain. It simply holds the space for what is seeking to appear. And that space becomes magnetic. It doesn't draw by pulling, but by being. It doesn't light up to compete, but to reveal. When you learn to hold your light without pushing it outward, you become the source others lean toward, because a steady glow outlasts the brightest flame. Chapter 6, The Quiet Gravity of Being Fully You. There is a kind of gravity that doesn't come from speaking, doing, proving. It comes from being fully yourself, unapologetically, unperformingly, unshaken. And that kind of gravity can't be taught. It can only be returned to. You've spent years trying to amplify your signal, but the signal isn't louder when it's forced. It's clearer when it's aligned, when you're not split between who you are and who you pretend to be. This is where real attraction begins, not in reaching outward, but in coming home. Because when you settle fully into your own skin, without excuse, without adjustment, the world feels it. You don't pull people in, they fall into your orbit. Not because you demanded it, but because your truth became unmistakable.
Chapter 7, When You Become the Invitation. The world doesn't need you to chase it. It needs you to become an invitation. Not by words, but by energy. Not by performance, but by embodiment. When you embody your truth, you become a frequency. And that frequency calls in everything that matches it. You don't attract what you want. You attract what you are. And when who you are is whole, honest, still, you don't need to promote it. You radiate it. Your life becomes the message. Your presence becomes the path. This is how the most powerful people lead. Not by persuading, but by becoming. They don't convince, they remember. And that remembrance becomes a light that speaks without sound, moves without motion, and invites without effort. Because when you become the invitation, what's meant to find you will always arrive.
Closing reflection, the radiance unchained. Tonight you reclaim the energy you once knew. You stop performing power and start remembering it. No more noise, no more striving, just the steady hum of your true presence. Because the energy you carry is louder than any voice. And that energy was always enough.